I was 19 years old and was going home from university after classes. I usually take my keys with me, but around that time I had lost them, and my mom was yet to take me to get a new copy. I remember I kept insisting, but she wouldn't listen. So what I did was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in. But my mom also took his keys and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room, and I called one of my aunties to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes, and then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there, and that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home. It was in the house across the street instead. No special reason, it just did. The moment I saw the guy, he gave me kind of a weird vibe, but I also tend to be paranoid every time I so much as hop on a taxi. So I just got in, rolled down the window, and kept a grip on both of my phones. It all seemed relatively normal until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. He just completely drove past it and claimed he was following the GPS when I asked him about it. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Now I was kind of doomed from the beginning because I don't know directions, and I could only rely on the driver being a decent person and recognizing the area, which I did. But wherever he was taking me, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when Mom drove to my uncle's place, but that was way farther away from my aunt's place. By now I was kind of thinking of what to do because this guy drove past a lot of empty housings and a couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. Then he stopped near a place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill, and then he turned off the car. I got lucky in so many ways, looking back on it. My phone had no credit as soon as I thought of that. My aunt called me and asked, "Where are you?" And I literally felt my heart drop because I had no idea, and this dude was just staring at me. I said I didn't know and asked him, "Hey, where did you take me?" And he replied with, "I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and opened the door real quick with a loud, "That's fine, I'll see myself out," and hauled ass like I hadn't in a very long time. I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on the back in case he'd chase me and pull on it. So I was holding it in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of where to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door, but for some reason, that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up because he was still following me in the car. Then I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong bar gate, except there was enough space under the gate to crawl in, so I literally threw the backpack and then crawled under. There was a huge electric control box and I crouched inside and hid, my aunt still on the phone. She, my other aunt, and my uncle were all on a call with each other, putting credit on my phone and asking for my live location through WhatsApp because I had no idea where I was, literally in the middle of nowhere. I waited there for like 2 hours and this guy wouldn't leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately ran back inside. There were even tiny spiders and old honeycombs, so I was also fighting both my arachnophobia and trypophobia. At some point, I'm guessing the guy left and my uncle got there in his truck. He didn't know where I was, so he kept honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. And then I finally did and got out. For a while I thought maybe this had been a misunderstanding and I just jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But then, when I got home after staying at my aunt's pharmacy for a while until my mom, who still didn't know much about what had happened, picked me up and I checked the Uber app, and not only did it say I had already paid, but it also said I made it to my destination, so I ruled that out. I had told my aunts not to tell Mom about it because she goes insane at the minor inconvenience, so telling her this would only freak her out, and she wouldn't be any help. I only let her know when I called her to come get me and on our way to get a copy of that key, because of course, something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me, and nowadays she always puts credit on my phone. A few years ago, I worked as an Uber driver, a job that often put me in some dangerous situations. This is one of them. It was a regular shift, and I had just picked up a passenger from downtown. She was heading home after work, and we chatted as I drove. It was around 8 p.m. by then, but it was the summer, and it was not dark yet. The destination was almost half an hour away, so I turned onto the highway. I took the exit that led to her neighborhood and turned at the first intersection. I was in the right lane of a two-lane road when another car, seemingly out of nowhere, collided with mine. It wasn't a major accident, just a fender bender, but it startled the both of us. I swerved in response but quickly regained control and immediately pulled over to the side of the road. I turned around and asked my passenger if she was okay. She was a bit shaken up, but she assured me that she was okay. As I was turned around facing my passenger, I noticed another car speed up behind me and then slam on the brakes no more than 10 feet behind my car. The driver's side door opened and a man got out. I could tell that he was yelling as he speed walked towards my car. My passenger looked back at him and then back towards me. I could tell that she was uncomfortable. Before I knew it, the man was standing in front of my door, still yelling. It wasn't making a lot of sense, but I could hear him say, "What the F," at least 5 or 10 times. I didn't say anything and kept my eyes pointed straight ahead. I didn't want to talk to that guy. There was no point. I figured we'd let the cops sort it out. I knew that he ran into my car, but it looked like he wanted to pin the accident on me. Either that or he actually thought it was my fault. I wasn't worried about that, though, because I had my passenger as a witness, and if that wasn't enough, then my dash cam likely caught most of it. Then in a sudden move, he yanked at my door handle. As soon as it swung open, I realized how stupid I was for leaving it unlocked. Normally, I wouldn't be so careless, but in the commotion, I forgot to hit the lock button. When the door was open, the man stood between it and the car, preventing me from closing it. I turned towards him and put my arm out to keep him from reaching into my car. I thought he was going to try to pull me out, but I still had my seatbelt on, and I wouldn't let him take it off. I kept him at a safe distance, but after a while he pulled a gun. He didn't point it at me right away, but he held it in his right hand as a threat, it seemed. While this was happening, I glanced to the back seat of my car. My passenger was on the phone. She was calling the cops. The police arrived just a few minutes later. The other driver, still holding the gun, tried to spin the story, claiming that I was the aggressor. He tried to blame the accident on me and claimed that I tried to assault him, even though I was still sitting in my car. He was standing in front of my door, holding a gun. It was obvious that the cops didn't believe him, but they stayed professional and separated us. He gave up his gun and was brought down the road a bit. They had him sit on the curb while I stayed in my car. With the police there, I explained my side of what took place. My passenger confirmed that, then I told him that I had a dash cam. I wasn't sure how much of it would be on there because of how it's positioned, but it would have caught some of it at least. While the cops were dealing with the other driver, I loaded the footage from my dash cam onto my phone. It clearly showed that I was not at fault for the accident. You could also see him approaching my car angrily, but it didn't show the confrontation at my door. He was holding the gun when the cops arrived, though, so that would not be in question anyway. The relief I felt when I saw the truth was immense. I was still really shaken up, not from the accident, but from being threatened by that unhinged maniac who somehow managed to qualify for a firearm. The other guy was arrested, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Before I left, the cops asked if I wanted to press charges for 2 things. For one, it was a criminal offense for him to open my car door without permission. And second, they decided that pulling the gun constituted a threat. I told them that I wanted to press charges for both. After that, I took off and dropped my passenger at her destination. Then I stopped for the day and drove home. One funny thing happened later that evening. I was at home watching TV and trying to get my mind off of what happened earlier. I pulled out my phone to check the Uber app out of habit, and I noticed I had a 4-star rating from my passenger, who was in the car when it happened. I thought I handled it all pretty well. It was a Friday evening, and I had been hanging out at a friend's house, just catching up and unwinding after a long week. It was getting late, around 1 a.m., when I decided to head home, so I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber, as I often did. The car came within minutes, and I hopped in. It was a silver Ford with a bright red antenna ball. The driver was a man in his late 40s. He had glasses and a beard. His hair was shoulder-length and black with some gray. He tried to strike up a conversation. I went along with it for a while, but sort of let it die off after a minute or two. After about 5 minutes of silence, he started to ask me some personal questions. Where I worked, if I lived alone, and other details that felt too intrusive for a stranger. I tried to give vague answers, hoping that he'd get a hint, but he kept going. His questions became more probing, and he was glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I remember looking out the window and realized I needed to get out of that car. I didn't feel safe. Acting on impulse, I told the driver that I was suddenly feeling sick and asked him to pull over. I figured that was a believable enough excuse. He hesitated for a moment, then finally pulled over to the side of the road. I thanked him quickly and got out of the car. My heart was racing as I watched him drive away. I took a moment to calm myself, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. It may sound like I was overreacting, but there was something about him that was setting off my instincts. It's hard to explain. It was still too far to walk, so I ordered another Uber. While I waited for that one, it hit me that the first driver could have my address. I stupidly put in my real house as the destination. Some of my friends use an address that's a few blocks away just for added safety. When my next Uber came, the driver was in stark contrast to the first. It was a younger guy who had music playing. The only thing he said to me was when he asked me if it was okay to leave the music on. I said it was fine, and then that was that. When we finally got to my address, I stepped out of the car. The driver had parked on the other side of the street, so I got out and crossed. That's when I saw it. That same silver Ford from my first ride was parked in front of my house. It was unmistakable with the bright red antenna ball. The driver was sitting inside, just looking at my house. I went around back through my neighbor's yard and managed to get in without being seen, or so I thought. Never turning on a light, I peeked through the blinds. The car was still there. I called the police and asked them to send somebody out. When they finally did, I watched out my window as they approached the car. The driver got out and started talking to the officers. I couldn't hear what was being said, but the conversation seemed intense. After a few minutes, the police took some notes, and the driver got back into his car and drove off. One of the officers came to my door to explain what happened. They said the driver claimed to be waiting for another ride in the area and didn't realize he was parked in front of my house. It sounded like a weak excuse to me. I asked if he proved it by showing them the Uber app, but they said he didn't. I don't think the officers were familiar enough with it to know anyway. They advised me to call again if he showed up or if anything else happened. For weeks after, I was paranoid every time I ordered a ride. I would double-check the driver's details, never ride alone at night. Most importantly, I never used my exact address anymore. There's a small convenience store near my house that I use. Sometimes I'll pick up a few things there on my way home just so I can pretend I'm not some crazy paranoid person. Not that I should be blamed for that anyway.